Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Dojo of Gain. Today we have Joe Rogan seeing how Dana White's health has improved. It has improved with age. He's obviously in a lot better shape than he used to be. And this topic seems pretty interesting to me, considering that I'm in my 30s now. Let's see what Dana White is doing to stay young. And I'm kind of curious to see if they'll cover what kind of PEDs Dana White is taking, because he's obviously on some PEDs, but sometimes they try to keep that aspect of it a secret, so maybe they won't say it. But Joe Rogan is pretty transparent about his testosterone usage, his HCG usage, BPC 157, whatever he uses, he's pretty transparent, so maybe they will actually tell us what PEDs he's taking. So I'm curious about that. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Rogan experience.
He credits talking to you and taking your advice as completely changing his life, and now he feels infinitely better.
Yeah, I mean, he did a lot of the work himself.
Well, he had to, but you had to tell him what to do, but luckily he listened.
Yeah, I mean, I think giving him a life expectancy just kind of validated it for him. It just really put it in his face. And, you know, because that's something you can calculate. He's like, okay, well, I'm 53 now. 63 doesn't seem that far off.
Right.
You know?
A lot of like high stress individuals that don't take care of themselves, their ticker checks out.
Yeah.
Around 65.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you go ahead and pick up a newspaper, even though it's not that common nowadays, people don't really pick up newspapers like they used to, you'll go ahead and see that a lot of the people that are dying, especially in the United States, are in their 50s and 60s. Now, another common factor that you'll see with these people is that they are overweight or obese. So that is one of the very problematic things about the idea of being healthy at any size. It's obviously impossible because being fat automatically means you're unhealthy. Even if all your health markers are in the right place, they would still be better if you weren't fat. And you're doing wear and tear on your ligaments and joints and complete skeletal structure. Plus, you're living in a state of inflammation. You have inflammation in your brain, inflammation in your entire body, your organs. It's not a good place to be. You can get other diseases just from having inflammation in your brain, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. You're going to kill neurons. That's not good. So let's see how he goes on to expand his life expectancy. I would like to see what my life expectancy is as well. I wonder how you do that, but also probably kind of terrifying to know. Although, considering my family history, my life expectancy is probably like 90 years old because my grandma's 88 and my grandfather passed away at 86 and he was an alcoholic. So I do have genes that tend to last for a long time, so hopefully I inherited that.
67. That's
yeah.
pretty standard.
It just takes its toll. I mean, and the funny thing is, you know, when you go back and you look at the pictures of him prior to,
Oh, yeah.
he does kind of look like he was about to pop, you know.
It's not good. Yeah, he had a big old moon face, and he was, you know,
Veins up on the forehead and the veins out of the side of the neck.
thick. What was first of all, how did he meet you? How did this come about, and like how did the conversation start?
So we have a mutual friend named Carrie Kasem. If you remember Casey Kasem,
Yeah, I know
Weekly
Carrie.
Top
I
40.
worked with her back in the day in the early UFCs.
Okay, so you know, I recently met Carrie, and she had kind of a life-changing experience as well. You know, if you know anything about her journey with Lyme disease and chronic viral infection, I mean, she really struggled and ended up healing herself. And she took the same test that Dana White did. It was life-changing for her, and she was like,
What is this test?
It's a genetic test. It looks at genetic methylation pathways. So
Methylation pathways?
methylation pathways.
What's that word mean?
So think about it like this. You know, we pull crude oil out of the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't put crude oil into your gas tank, right? Because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. So what happens is crude oil has to be refined into gasoline, and then the car can run. Okay, so in human beings, there's a similar process called methylation. There's not a single compound known to mankind, not one. There's no vitamin, no mineral, no amino acid, no nutrient, no protein, no nutrient of any kind that enters the human body and is used in the format that we put it in. Without a single exception, everything we put into our bodies has to be refined into the usable form. If you can't make this conversion, you have a deficiency. It's this deficiency that leads to the most common ailments that we suffer from. So that process is called methylation, and there are several genes that govern it. This is where a lot of the misconception about genetically inherited disease comes from, right? We'll say, well, Joe, your father-in-law has, not your father-in-law, your father on your mom's side had hypertension, your grandfather had hypertension, now you have hypertension. So you have genetically inherited hypertension, or you have familial hypertension. Well,
and hypertension is commonly known as high blood pressure. Is that
high
the same
blood
thing?
pressure. Yeah, high blood pressure. But 85% of all high blood pressure is what we call idiopathic, right? It's of unknown origin. So we say that things are genetically inherited because they run in families. But it's rarely the disease that's passed from generation to generation. What we pass from generation to generation is the inability to refine a raw material, which causes a deficiency, which leads to that disease.
And what generally leads to hypertension?
Okay, interesting. So it's the body's process of basically nutrient absorption that is inherited, not necessarily the disease. So this malfunction of processes is what causes the disease. This is what's passed on genetically. Now, to the yin, to the yang that I was talking about earlier about my grandparents being very old, that's on my mother's side. On my dad's side, both of my grandparents died young, and they both had Alzheimer's, which I did not know because my dad bounced and went to Puerto Rico when I was 4. So I figured this out when I was an adult after doing martial arts for almost 20 years, getting punched in the head on a weekly basis, 3 times a week. I was sparring, so I've been punched in the head thousands of times, probably had hundreds of concussions. It's bad information to find out later, which is why I don't really spar much anymore. But I mean, I would if YouTube really wants to see it. But now, this is speculation, just speculation. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a scientist, anything of the sort. So please, community guidelines, do not get mad at me. It's just speculation, just ideas, right? So, Alzheimer is basically neurodegeneration. Your brain gets smaller, you lose neurons with time, which is why you forget everything. Now, there are things that you can do now to prevent that. There are certain peptides like dihexa that increases neurogenesis substantially. So if you're forcing neurogenesis, ideally maybe you could prevent Alzheimer's. I don't know if that's possible. Like, I'm not a doctor, like I said. You can also take growth hormone, which will increase all the growth factors within the brain as well. And there's also a peptide called cerebrolysin, which is a peptide from pig brains that increases neurogenesis as well. Now, the problem with cerebrolysin is that you have to inject it in its huge amounts, and it's multiple times a week, like every other day, every 2 days, and it's like 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams, like basically you're injecting needles full. It's very problematic, so dihexa seems like a much simpler alternative. There's also other things that can increase growth hormone, which increases neurogenesis, like BPC 157. So there are some things that you can do to prevent that genetic disposition, in my opinion, but maybe I'm wrong. Also, something that is scientifically proven to stop Alzheimer's in up to 60% of people is daily usage of the sauna. The sauna actually disinflames the brain and prevents some of that neurological loss that you would have. So just simply using the sauna could help to prevent you from having Alzheimer's or other neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, for example. And that is basically free. Well, you need a gym membership. So that's something you can do naturally. Another genetic disposition that I have is that people in my family have Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's, arthritis. But these are women, right? Men have denser bones. Plus, I lift weights, so I doubt that I have arthritis because lifting weights increases bone density. And also, like I said, there's ways to get around it. BPC 157 increases bone density, growth hormone increases bone density, and I am more than willing to do biohacking as I get older in order to prevent diseases. Why not? I wouldn't just merely accept being old and not mobile. I would do everything I can in my power to maintain athleticism as long as possible. Live the best life that I can, right? But let's keep going.
So if you look at Dana White's case, right, is a perfectly common case. In fact, the Journal of Hypertension published an article in November 19th of 2017, if you want to look that article up, and essentially linking an amino acid in the bloodstream called homocysteine to hypertension. And the reason for this is you got homocysteine in your blood. I've got it in my blood. Everybody listening to this podcast has homocysteine. But if you have an impaired ability to break homocysteine down, right, to take that amino acid, homocysteine, and convert it into a harmless amino acid called methionine, if you can't make this conversion, homocysteine rises. It causes something called hyperhomocystinemia, high homocysteine in the blood. When homocysteine rises, it becomes one of the more inflammatory compounds in the human body. As it's cruising by the inside lining of the artery, it starts to irritate the artery. It actually reduces the artery's elasticity and can even cause it to constrict. So think about this. You've got 63,000 miles of blood vessel, roughly, in your body. It doesn't take much narrowing to drive pressure up. Think about it. 85% of all hypertensive diagnosis of high blood pressure, primary hypertension or essential hypertension, are idiopathic, right? Unknown origin. Only 15% of them are secondary hypertension, of where we know the exact cause. And so what we do is we take people that have high blood pressure. We run a bunch of tests on them. EKG, it's normal. EEG, it's normal. Heart and lung sounds, cardiac cath, dye contrast study. We do all of these cardiovascular tests and they all come out normal. Yet the person still has high blood pressure. And that's largely because the high levels of homocysteine are causing vascular narrowing. I mean, this is a fixed system, right? So if I make the pipes smaller in a fixed system, pressure goes up. So in Dana's case specifically, and he's thrown his blood work out on the internet, so we can talk about his labs. But in his cases, he had one of the highest levels of homocysteine that I'd personally ever seen, and our clinical team had seen.
So when you say high blood pressure, could you define, like, I'm not good at that. Whenever I get my blood pressure, they tell me the number and they say it's good. And I go, okay. But
So,
I don't know
like-
what's a good number.
So 120 over 70, 120 over
And what's
80,
high?
130, 140, 150, 160.
When does it get dangerous?
140, 150 starts to get dangerous. People
Really?
walk around at 140, 150, 160 all the time.
And they don't know it.
It's the silent killer. You don't feel it. You think you would feel high blood pressure, but very often it's the silent killer because you don't feel it. It's not like you hear your blood rushing in your ears, although you may. It's not like you feel pressure in your head or pressure in your neck or pressure in your chest. That's why high blood pressure, hypertension, is one of the silent killers in cardiovascular disease, right? In fact,
Interesting. I thought when you had high blood pressure, you could feel it in your head, like causes migraines and things like that. Interesting that people don't know that they have high blood pressure. Luckily, I get my blood pressure checked regularly and I'm always good. Actually, naturally have low blood pressure, so I think I'm good in that area. But yeah, I did not know that you couldn't feel when you have high blood pressure, and especially if you're overweight, you should definitely get that checked out. If you're high stress, you should get that checked out, obviously.
one of the first primary symptoms is sudden death, right? So we often put people on hypertensive medication before we actually look at whether or not they have high levels of homocysteine or whether or not they might have a gene mutation specifically called MTR, and you could test for it, or MTRR. And what this gene codes for is it codes for the enzymes that break down homocysteine and turn it into an amino acid called methionine, right? And so if this conversion is impaired, and this homocysteine starts to rise, and your vascular system constricts, it can drive your pressure up. And it drives your pressure up without anything being wrong with the heart. So then we start standing on the heart, which is what happened in Dana's case. Beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, all of these things. His blood pressure was still through the roof.
What was his number?
I think he was 160 over 110. I want to say it was very high. And it was consistently high. We were actually, our clinical team was taking his blood pressure 2 or 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and it was consistently very elevated, even though he was on blood pressure medication.
Really? So statins? Is that what he was on?
So statins was what you'd use on cholesterol,
okay.
like a Repatha or anything.
So
those
what
are
is
trying to lower.
What's a hypertension?
They're called beta blockers, like Enderol, calcium channel blockers. We call it ACE inhibitors. Sometimes we use diuretics.
And so he was still jacked up even though he was on those.
Oh, he was still jacked up even though he was on medication.
And what are the
Interesting. So the beta blockers actually had no effects on his blood pressure. So you cannot necessarily fix the blood pressure via directly the heart. Interesting. I'm learning new stuff because if anybody's familiar with Tony Hughes or Leo in longevity, they talk about using beta blockers to prevent the high blood pressure that happens when you take steroids. But maybe it's not as effective as they think it is. So that could be something to look into. I mean, I'm sure Tony Hughes is going to look over this video as well, but yeah, I didn't know that. Let's see what he uses to actually get his blood pressure down effectively. It's very interesting to me.
other factors? Like what other things cause hypertension?
Well, I mean, cardiovascular disease, and there are certain, direct genetic links to cardiovascular disease, but they're very rare. But diet, atherosclerosis, narrowing of the arteries, arterial sclerosis, hardening of the arteries, calcifications in the arterial wall can cause pressure to go up. Regurgitations in heart valves can cause pressure to increase. But when you think about the heart as a muscle, right, and all 4 chambers are circulating blood normally, and it's got a good vascular supply, but it's beating into constricted pipes. Think about what happens. That pressure is going to back up, right? And so we rarely go outside the heart to diagnose whether or not, and for the record, I am not a physician. I'm not licensed to practice medicine. I'm a human biologist. I didn't, learn my trade in medical school. I took 8 years of undergrad and postgraduate education in human biology. But for 20 years, I was a mortality expert in the insurance industry, and I just read medical records for a living. So the vast amount of what I've come to understand about modern medicine has just come from reading thousands and thousands and thousands of medical records. And you can see very often that when people were being diagnosed with high blood pressure, they were always looking at the heart. They never looked outside the heart to say, well, could it possibly be beating into a dysfunctional arterial system? And so in Dana's case, and I should have brought the numbers because I had the week over week numbers. It was astounding. We just put him on a simple amino acid called trimethylglycine, an amino acid you can get off the shelf. And what it did was it made up for this genetic deficiency, this lack of code to break down homocysteine. And his body started to methylate to break homocysteine down.
And is this a amino acid that pretty much everybody should be taking?
It's an amino acid that everybody with hypertension should consider if they have high homocysteine.
And say the word again. What is it? What's the amino acid called?
Trimethylglycine, TMG.
Is that
capital T, capital M?
Similar to regular glycine?
No, this is trimethylglycine. It's a little bit different than the amino acid glycine. So trimethylglycine will actually help to metabolize, to help give the body the raw material it needs.
I feel like I should write this shit down. I'm going to write down trimethylglycine.
He's going to be on trimethylglycine tomorrow.
Well, yeah, I'm going to take note of that as well because I take minoxidil to prevent hair loss. And minoxidil, one of the side effects are hypertension. So if I ever come across that problem, I have something I can do interesting. So it's just basically an amino acid that he used to be able to combat that vasal restriction that he had that was causing his hypertension and his high blood pressure, which is hypertension, was in his heart. That's interesting because it's always the heart that's looked into when it comes to these things. It's always beta blockers. I thought beta blockers were like the go-to thing to do, but it looks like it's more complicated than that. Well, like everything else in the human body, there's always complications. Human body is very complex. Even if you do something to fix a certain thing, down the line you might be ruining something else. So, I mean, with everything there's consequences. There's nothing that's just a fix-all, unfortunately. Not yet, right? Until they make like AI organs and stuff like this, AI blood vessels or whatever is coming in the future that Elon Musk is going to invent.
Tomorrow.
Well, I just want to keep track of all these different things you're saying, and oftentimes I do forget. So trimethylglycine, I'm gonna write that.
Trimethylglycine, or just put capital TMG. That's what it'll say on the bottle.
TMG. Okay.
And so, you know, sometimes I use the analogy that, you know, when I was getting my second human biology degree, I was in grad school, get my human biology degree. I had to take all these plant botany courses, which I hated, but you have to take them. Morphology of thallophytes and all these crazy courses about plants. But the one thing that really stood out to me by taking all these plant biology courses is that if there's ever anything wrong in the leaves of a plant, like the tree, the trunk, the leaves, or the branches, and you call a true arborist or a true botanist out to your house, they won't even touch the leaves or the branches of the trunk of the tree. The first thing they'll do is they'll core test the soil. And they'll go, you know what? This soil's deficient in nitrogen. And then they'll add nitrogen to the soil and the leaf will heal. But we don't think about human beings like this anymore. I feel like there's such a paucity of understanding of deep human physiology in a lot of the medical community, not all of the medical community. And we don't actually have...
All right, I'm going to say something. Now, this is just speculation. I'm not giving you guys any information purely for entertainment, speculation only. I believe that a lot of the medical industry is based on monetary gain, not necessarily finding a cure for something, because once you're able to fix a problem, you no longer need to go to the doctor for that problem. So there's no longer the prescription refill, there's no longer the consistent income that they're getting from the patient because they've already fixed the problem. It's a lot more lucrative to have a problem that's ongoing, so that way the patient needs to continue to return to the doctor's office, needs to continue to get more medications, and then more treatments to fix the side effects that he's getting from the medications. So it's very counterproductive in the idea of making money when it comes to just merely curing somebody. So this is part of the issue with the medical system, is that it's a very lucrative place, in basically everything in the world runs with money, right? Everybody wants money, so that's how it goes.
Faith in mankind and humanity and the body's ability to heal itself, and whether or not someone might be deficient in a raw material, not pathologic or diseased. So, for example, in Dana White's case, he was diagnosed with idiopathic hypertension, which he essentially did not have. He was being medicated for it. He had been medicated for it for 15 years. And he didn't really have hypertension. There was nothing really wrong with him. It's that his body couldn't break down homocysteine. It was deficient in the amino acids needed to break this homocysteine down. As soon as we put those back in his body, it started to function normally.
And where would you generally get those amino acids if you weren't taking them?
I mean, you can get them online. I mean, there's lots of great manufacturers.
No, if you weren't taking them, are they in food? Is it?
Oh, yeah, they're in foods. That's why if you look at certain diets, like high folate diets, like carnivore diets, diets that are high in dietary folate, leafy greens, grass-fed meats, eggs, dairy, you'll find that they have lower incidences of cancer diets and high dietary folate. So this is a raw material that we can get from our food, but very often our food is just so nutrient deficient, right? We update the macros on the back of a lot of labels, but if you look at the micros, like how much spinach, how much iron is in spinach or calcium is in spinach, or how much nutrients are on the label of most foods, I mean, it's a fraction of what's actually listed there. And so we're nutrient deficient. Right? Human beings are not as sick as we have been led to believe we are. The majority, in my opinion, of pathology and disease as we know it today are nutrient deficiencies, missing raw materials.
Yeah, we're obviously nutrient deficient, especially in first world countries where people have a little bit more money and they want to save time and they're depending on McDonald's, KFC, Burger King to feed them. These things are completely garbage and they will kill you. Do not consume fast food on a regular basis, maybe once a month or something like this. But yeah, you stay away from fast food, stay away from processed food. If you can throw it in the microwave and it's done, then it's probably not good. If it lasts on the shelf for months on end, it's probably not good. If you want to be as healthy as possible, you want to eat just basic food. Fruits, vegetables, meat, nuts, complex carbohydrates. You do not want to eat things that have been highly processed, and you want to stay away from sugar. Sugar is probably the worst thing that you can consume. Sugar causes inflammation. Inflammation is one of the main factors of aging. Plus, it causes insulin resistance. A lot of problems come from sugar. It feeds cancers. Sugar is a big deal, so if you're drinking pop, you're eating a lot of ice cream, candy, there will be consequences. I know this stuff is amazing. I used to survive on candy, ice cream, and pop when I was younger, before I was more educated on the body, because it's amazing. I mean, it's like a drug. It gives you a rush of dopamine. Even like a very good piece of chocolate give you a high rush of dopamine comparable to any drug. I understand why people love sugar, why children love sugar. And also, it's kind of ridiculous that in the United States, all the junk food and trash like Lucky Charms, Pop-Tarts, this is children's food. When the body is in development, when the brain is in development, it should be the main time in your life that you should be eating healthy food in order to develop properly. But in the US, we do the opposite. We trash when we're young, chicken nuggets, and then when we're old, we try to fix the problem by eating healthy. It would be a lot better to prevent it by giving your children healthy food, whole foods, not allowing them to eat sugar. I mean, some people might look at that and say that you're being too strict, but actually you are being very loving by doing that, because you're giving your child a longer, healthier life. It's not really spoiling your child, giving them chicken nuggets and candy and things like this, because you're causing them to probably die in their 60s. Just keep that in mind.
Material in the human body. And we just accept all these things as a consequence of aging: weight gain, water retention, lack of sleep, poor focus and concentration, lack of waking energy, hormone imbalance. And we think that the body has all of these different pathologies and diseases, but the truth is it's usually nutrient deficient. It's astounding what happens to human beings when you give their body the raw material that it needs to do its job. I mean, it really is. And so if you're just supplementing for the sake of supplementing, then there's only a marginal chance that you're getting what you need. If you're supplementing for deficiency, that's when magic happens in the human body.
And I really need somebody to do one of these genetic tests on me. That's why you guys need to make your paper. Make your paper young, so that way when you're getting into your 30s and 40s, you'll have the paper to get somebody to do these tests for you, because I imagine they're very expensive, right? I'm just now getting on my grind. I started at 28, getting on my grind. It's basically BSing, traveling around, partying, wasting my time when I was younger. So I would suggest you do not do that. Also, although it seems like the most interesting thing to do when you're younger, you have plenty of energy, plenty of capability to do those things in your 30s. So just go ahead and focus on getting your money up in your 20s. You can avoid these issues in your 30s, and you can imagine being able to travel and party, but with plenty of money, instead of being broke, buying beer, and then not knowing how you're going to eat the next day. It's definitely a way better choice to make the money first. So hopefully if you're younger, you'll listen, but nobody really listens. People basically just make their mistakes. Everybody wants to make their mistakes on their own way. Unfortunately, no matter how many times somebody tells somebody something, they usually won't listen. I bet the only way that you could really get somebody to listen is if somebody invented a time machine and they could see their future self and talk to themselves, probably, because people basically only listen to themselves, unfortunately. But I'm going to wrap it up there with this one. I'll catch you guys next time. Probably do another live stream in Spanish, so if you guys speak Spanish, you can tune back in.